I'm the Natural Resources Specialist from the Environmental Division, so I always say that I do birds and bunnies. That's kind of, I get to do the furry fun stuff. But there's some other things that we do too, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the management roles related to noxious weeds that the county has. So first of all, we have to address the weeds on county property just like any landowner does. And as Brian mentioned, one of those areas that we address are right-of-ways. We have, as of March 6th, we had 2,131 miles of road in El Paso County, including the accompanying right-of-ways. Typically a 60-foot right-of-way, 30 feet from center line. We have two people, Brian and Tina, who really do the weed work related to those. So it's a lot of area and not a lot of staffing. So county staff certainly keeps an eye out when we're out and about, and we appreciate any input from the public when they see noxious weeds in the right-of-ways. Give us a call and let us know. There's varying distances, but the majority, kind of the typical right-of-way is the. Yeah, that's going to be for the majority of the roads. So we contract with a certified applicator, a state-certified applicator, to do our noxious weed spraying on the county properties. And they are given a statement of work that looks like that, and it identifies the noxious weed or weed species that are needing to be addressed, the locations of where they're at, and any special instructions, if there's a wetland nearby, they need to use aquatically certified chemicals. And they're typically given a map. We try to do all the weed spraying in kind of one area, so it's kind of efficiency in the efforts. And they do broadcast spraying or backpack spraying, kind of depending on the size of the infestation. We also address the noxious weeds in the regional and interpretive parks. So this is a list of some of the county parks. Bear Creek has a pretty good diversity of noxious weeds. And you can see, being located in the city, that would kind of make sense. It's got a lot of the escaped ornamentals in it, as well as some others like the knapweed and thistle. Black Forest and Fox Run, which had traditionally been more isolated up there in the north, just really had problems with the yellow toadflax. Homestead Ranch has got some wet areas, which has the Canada thistle. And Fountain Creek, it has probably biggest problem with like tamarisk and Russian olive, and that's kind of typical of the area along Fountain Creek. It just, those plants, or trees and shrubs kind of get brought in there. The plant on the left is a hoary cress. The one on top is a yellow toadflax, and the bottom is a Dalmatian toadflax, all that were in county parks. We also have the Pate Mines Interpretive Park. That property is covered. It's both kind of an outright county property, and it's also a property that's owned by the county. That a portion of it is covered by a conservation easement, which I'll talk about later. It's kind of got an assortment of different weeds. For the parcels that we own, we typically give our contractor a map that shows kind of, if there's a large infestation, it sort of shows the region that the plants are in. So that those little boxes and circles kind of show a general area if they're scattered. If they're limited to a drainage, we try to indicate that they need to address the plants in the drainage. And then if it's a smaller pocket, we're able to give them actual coordinates of where those plants are and where they need to be sprayed. A new park in Falcon is being developed. Currently there's really not much for noxious weeds on the property. But as land gets disturbed, that's when noxious weeds like to come in. So a management plan will be developed. A noxious weed management plan will be developed for that park as they start working on the development of it, to ensure that weeds aren't brought in or allowed to establish. We address noxious weeds along the regional trails. Fountain Creek Regional Trail is another one that's both covered. The trail portion is kind of under county management, and there's a couple parcels north of Willow Springs Pond that is covered by a conservation easement. Kind of got an assortment of thistles down there. And the new Santa Fe Regional Trail up north, we address the weeds along there. And this little plant in the center is a Scotch thistle, and they're kind of near and dear to my heart. when I started for the county, I worked for the Parks Maintenance North District, and we had a lot of Scotch thistle just south of the Air Force Academy. And we always lovingly referred to it as the ponderosa thistle, kind of like after the ponderosa trees, because it was big and nasty and mean and scary and really horrible to try to cut down. We also have smaller trails like Cruz Gulch. When we get poison hemlock on county properties, even though it's only C-listed, we tend to address it pretty aggressively because of the potential dangers associated with it. Little kids sometimes can get a hold of it. It's hollow, so they like to play with it. So we hit poison hemlock pretty hard when we get it on our properties. Rock Island Trail, kind of just an assortment of weeds. So those were the pretty cut and dry areas that we deal with noxious weeds. This is property, we have to take care of it just like any property owner. We also deal with noxious weeds in terms of our mitigation sites. So basically, when we're working on a project, a road project, a trail project, something that has ground disturbing activities, we have to address that project related to threatened and endangered species and wetlands impacts. And in designing the project, the first thing we have to do is design it in such a way as to avoid impacts to T&E species habitat or wetlands to the maximum extent practicable. Then it has to be designed, once you've done that, then you try to design it in such a way as to minimize those impacts. And then finally you get down to certain unavoidable impacts, and those have to be mitigated. And basically what mitigation is it's a way of offsetting the impacts that you're going to have. So so there's no net loss of either wetlands or the habitat. So you can replace that through some various ways. Enhancement, restoration, those are things like dealing with the noxious weeds, doing plantings. You can do creation, where you're actually making habitat. Sometimes that can be kind of tricky. Or preservation, that's taking existing habitat and actually setting it aside and protecting it in perpetuity for either the wetlands or the species. Most all of those, and then those are done at different ratios. So if you're doing preservation, that's typically done at a lot higher ratio. So if you're disturbing an acre, you may have to preserve 10 acres, whereas like creation can be done at smaller ratios. But all of those pretty much usually have a weed control aspect to them. The weeds are going to impact the habitat quality or the wetland quality, and the weeds are going to need to be addressed. And those pictures, those are willow sprigs, and they're pretty cool because you can take a willow stem and cut it into kind of a 2-foot stick. And if you've got water, you can stick it in the ground as a stick, and it will sprout. The one in the center, those are sprouting out in Falcon at a wetland that we created. And those ones on the left, they haven't sprouted yet in that picture, but they have sprouted since. And those are up at Monument Lake. So they're pretty cool. As long as they keep their feet wet, they'll sprout. The threatened and endangered species that we really deal with in El Paso County is the Preble's Meadow Jumping Mouse, or PMJM. So I'm just going to talk about a few of the sites where we have done Preble's PMJM mitigation. The site is Struthers Road. There was a project up there. It was kind of a big project, encompassed a lot of agencies. An improvement to the interchange to I-25 and Baptist Road, an extension of Struthers Road, and some work on Baptist Road. We ended up, the county, through the extension of Struthers Road, ended up impacting some of CDOT's mouse mitigation property, which is up there in a kind of triangular parcel in that corner, and it had to mitigate for that. So when you're doing your mitigation, you work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service when it's for threatened and endangered species, and you sort of define what sort of success criteria you're going to have for your mitigation site. So you have to have a certain level of percent cover. You have to have a certain number of desirable species in order to have that site be considered successful and signed off on. So part of having desirable species is controlling the noxious weeds. So this site, we had to do this little section kind of along the road, and the first picture on the left was right after the work had been done, and the one on the top was after the work had been done, and then the two kind of lower and to the right were just taken last year. So We don't really have much problem with the noxious weeds up there. We've controlled them pretty well, with the exception of cheatgrass. The problem we had with that site was getting the native grasses to establish. They were planted right kind of the beginning of a drought, and natives take a long time to get established, so it's been an ongoing process to get those where we need them to be. Kind of in conjunction with that whole Struthers Baptist Road project, we also had to do some mitigation on a conservation easement property. This is more in the Glen Eagle area, a little away from the actual project site. And we preserved a little over 24 acres of really nice PMJM habitat on that property. And also a component of that preservation was enhancing 5 acres through noxious weed control. So you can see the pictures on the left. You can see the white fuzzy stuff. That was Canada thistle. This property has some gorgeous wetlands and riparian corridor on it, but had a lot of Canada thistle. And so the pictures on the right were just taken last year, and that Canada thistle is very well controlled. This property also had a lot of diffuse knapweed on it, which was taken care of through herbicide application, and a lot of yellow toadflax. The problem with yellow toadflax is it likes to tuck up under desirable plants like scrub oak and other little shrubs, so it makes it sometimes hard to treat with herbicide. This one had yellow toadflax scattered all over the scrub oak, and so we did several releases of the insects, the biocontrols out there, and they're doing a pretty good job getting it under control. All of these mitigation sites, whether they're threatened and endangered species or wetland, we have to control the weeds in perpetuity. So even if the permit or the work is complete, we are still on the hook for making sure that we maintain them and the health of the properties going forth into the future. So that was the threatened and endangered species sites. We also have to do wetland mitigation. This Struthers Baptist Road project also included some wetland mitigation. We had to create 3/4 of an acre of wetlands. We got really lucky on this one. We were able to actually make some very nice wetlands down on the corner of Leather Chaps and Baptist Road. And basically, of course, to make a wetland successfully, you have to have water. That's kind of an important component. But you can see that little picture, kind of the second picture over from the left. When you dig a hole there is water on that site. There was from the beginning. That's why it was so successful. You dig a hole and that groundwater comes up. So basically, to create the wetland, you scraped off some of the layers of the surface to allow the groundwater to get a little closer to the surface, and then did the plantings, and it established very nicely. There were a lot of noxious weeds in the upland areas, which we've had to stay on top of to make sure they don't kind of make their way down into the wetland. The preferred mitigation is if you can do it on site where the actual project was done. A lot of times you can't do that because your project sometimes changes, puts down a footprint of a new road. But at McCrae Reservoir down in Fountain, we were able to do on-site mitigation because this was just an improvement, some repair to the water impoundment down there, or the dam or impoundment. So once most of the work was temporary, once that work was done with some planting and a little bit of help, a lot of it came back on its own. So we were able to mitigate actually on site. It actually came back too well. We've actually had people complain that they can't see the lake. So you never know what your problems are going to be. There has been, again, we're on the hook to watch these in perpetuity. So Tina, I guess, had found some water hyacinth and water lettuce down there, and those are on the watch list. But I guess those didn't overwinter. So things are still going well down there. We do have to go down there and spray the noxious weeds, pretty much annually. It gets to be some big patches of poison hemlock down there that we want to knock back. A couple other sites, Drake Lake, we did a drainage improvement project out off of Highway 24. Made, again, almost 3/4 of an acre of wet meadow out at the Drake Lake property, which is near Meadow Lake Airport. Mitigation was done both at Drake Lake and then within the drainage. It was little shelves were made kind of in the drainage way to allow for some of the wetland vegetation to be put actually in the drainage. Again, a kind of assortment of weeds out there that we have to address. Cottonwood Meadows down in Fountain. That was a big project. That involved actually creating wetlands. We expanded the wetlands again by removing some of that the soil to allow the water to be closer to the surface. Improve the habitat by removing a lot of tamarisk and Russian olive, and noxious weed control, almost 26 acres of noxious weed control. Again, kind of an assortment of weeds that are down there and we continually address. Once in a while, mouse habitat and wetland habitat kind of tend to be in the same place. Mice like the Preble's mice like the riparian areas. So sometimes we're able to do our mouse mitigation and our wetland mitigation in the same place. This was done at Monument Lake. There was a big project to repair the dam up there. We worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and partnered with the town of Monument for this. This project was started in 2003 and it took 10 years to get the permit closed out on it. So it was kind of a long process. Mitigation was both done on site at Monument Lake as well as a little park kind of nearby, Dirty Woman Creek Park. We created, restored, and enhanced a little over 6 acres of mouse habitat and a little over an acre of wetland habitat. And the deal was, on the map, there was really great mouse habitat north of the lake and really great mouse habitat south of the lake. And when we did the work to improve the dam or to repair the dam, we removed a lot of the vegetation off the dam and off of the little shelf kind of on the west side of the lake. And so we had to make, the pictures on the left are what's called the mouse superhighway. And that allowed the mice with the vegetation and proper cover to have a corridor that they could move around the lake to link up between the two good areas of habitat on the north and the south. We also had to make some wetlands, which was done kind of on that shelf as well on the north end, as well as on the north end of the lake. And that, it's kind of hard to tell in that picture, but those two on the right have some of those willow sprigs in them. This one was tricky because with fishermen getting along the lake, they would trample down our mitigation. So it was a little tricky to get the plants to take in there. And this one, there's a lot of surrounding areas with pretty serious infestations of noxious weeds up there. So this one will be an ongoing issue, keeping the weeds out of it. So these little furry guys are really good at making wetlands. Us non-furry people aren't so good at making wetlands. So I've showed you some pictures and some examples of some of our successful mitigation sites. A lot of mitigations aren't very successful, and we struggle to get them to take, but there's lack of water, bad location. So what the county put in place, or developed in the 2011, was the county's umbrella wetland mitigation banking instrument. And basically that's kind of between us and the county and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is allows you to kind of pre-mitigate and bank those wetland credits. So you can do the work ahead of time. We can have some assurances that, well, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers gets some assurances that the wetland is taken, is doing well, and then they can put those credits in our bank. We have some assurances. There's some defined ratios. We know what's expected of us in terms of monitoring, what the success criteria is going to be, and you know, how we're going to get our credits out of it. So it makes everything a lot more defined. So a couple of the wetland mitigation sites that we have. One is in Falcon. It was the original deposit into our bank to get it going. The picture on the left, that was when we made the wetland. So basically scraping that soil off again, letting the water get closer to the surface, and then the vegetation came in. That's where those willow sprigs were from the very beginning slides. And we were able to put in a little over 4.5 acres of wetland that was created out there, was placed in the bank. We've been able to use that credit on 5 different projects. And we only have 0.058 acres left of that credit. So now when we have to continually address, every couple of years we go out there and we have to hit some of the Canada thistle, but it generally stays in pretty good shape. We're currently developing a site which is across the road, the wetland you'll see across the road when you leave to the west. We originally estimated that we might be able to get 29 acres of wetland credit out of it. There's some issues with some erosion over there, so it might be tweaked a little bit where it's not as much of a wetland project as much as a stream restoration project, but we'll still get some credits for it. And there's a lot of weeds out there, a lot of Canada thistle, and so we get enhancement credits from addressing the noxious weeds as well. So kind of the final area that we take care of with the county in terms of noxious weeds are conservation easements. And basically a conservation easement is an agreement between a landowner and a qualified organization such as a land trust or a local government, a certified local government that puts limitations on the use of the land. It's typically stripping the land, the property, of its development rights for the purpose of protecting some sort of conservation value. So that could be ecological, wildlife, scenic, historical. Those are defined by the IRS actually, because the landowner then gets some pretty significant tax credits for preserving their land or removing those development rights. El Paso County acts as both a grantor of easements, so we have properties that we put easements on our properties, but we're also the grantee. We're certified by the state to hold conservation easements. So some of the county-owned properties, these are owned by the county. They have a conservation easement on them that is held by the Palmer Land Trust. Is the Christian Estate, which is down in Fountain. And we still, regardless of whether it has an easement on it or not, we still have to address the noxious weeds on the property. But there's a little bit higher level of oversight in terms of making sure that we're maintaining the conservation values. And you have to get permission to do different things from the holder of the easement. The Schrader property, which is adjacent to the Fountain Creek Nature Center. And this was actually a property that was originally placed under a conservation easement that the county held, but then the landowner donated it to the county. So we couldn't be both a grantor and a grantee. So Palmer Land Trust took that property. It was covered, that's all Canada thistle, that white fuzz. It was covered in Canada thistle when we took it, and now it's pretty clean. We've really got the Canada thistle knocked back. And then the Freeman paint mines, I mentioned that earlier, that one's covered by, it's both just a straight up county interpretive park, as well as a portion of it's encumbered by a conservation easement. Then that kind of the southern part down north of the Hoodoos is the conservation easement portion. And then there's also properties where we are the holders of the conservation easement. The county holds the conservation easement. So the landowner still owns the property, but the county is responsible for ensuring that that landowner maintains the conservation values. One of those is the Craddock and Walden property, which is down be north of the Willow Springs Pond. A portion of that includes the Fountain Creek Regional Trail, and then the parcels surrounding that have the conservation easement on them. County takes care of the trail portion, and the landowner takes care of the surrounding parcel portion in terms of noxious weed management. First Bank property, which is up in Glen Eagle. And this one really illustrates some of the issues that a lot of the conservation easement properties have. Is they're located, a lot of them are located on driveways, private driveways, further in. They're not accessed via a county road. So when I go in to monitor the conservation easement to make sure that they're complying with their deed of easement, if they have weeds on them, if their neighbors have weeds, if Tina and Brian can't see those weeds from a county road, they can't send a weed letter. So a lot of these landowners in these more isolated properties will have issues with noxious weeds that are coming from their neighbors. They have to take care of the weeds on their property because of the conservation easement. But unless they want to make a complaint against their neighbor, we can't tell the neighbor that they have to take care of their weeds. So we have quite a few of them that have this issue. And this myrtle spurge on this First Bank one comes in from adjacent properties. They've addressed it quite a bit, and it just keeps coming in. But we can't send a letter because I'm on their property looking at it, not from a right-of-way. These two properties were both affected by the fire. Robinson was the Black Forest fire. Blodgett was Waldo Canyon. Robinson is another one. It's got a long driveway into it. Properties surrounding it are full of knapweed. They have to take care of the knapweed on their property. Unless they want to complain about their neighbors, we can't make them take care of it on theirs. Got some assortment of different sort of weeds that are typical of agricultural areas. These pictures kind of show sometimes some of the mistakes people can make with the herbicides. Told them they had to take care of their yellow toad flax, which they did. Unfortunately, like I said, the yellow toad flax likes to tuck in with other things that we like. and took out a whole nice, beautiful patch of snowberry in the process of taking out the yellow toadflax. So to be really careful about how hard you go after the weeds sometimes. This Blodgett property, he's used kind of an assortment of different controls on his property. Herbicide for the musk thistle, hand removal for the absinthe wormwood, which really hasn't worked all that well. And then had released a bunch of insects on the yellow toadflax prior to the fire, and then that was where the insects lived, that little burnt picture. So I kind of doubt they're around anymore. And we have sometimes with our easements we have an issue when they change land, change ownership. The original landowner put the conservation easement on the property because they loved the property, they wanted the tax benefits. The new owner doesn't always see that. They don't have the same appreciation for the property. They are not the ones who receive the tax benefits, so they're less interested in kind of fulfilling the terms of the deed of conservation easement, which they still have to. Those go with the land in perpetuity. So we've struggled with some of these properties. This one is, if you want to see noxious weeds, this is the property to go to. It's up off of Mount Herman Road. And we've actually had to enforce somewhat against this landowner to make sure that they're taking care of them like they're supposed to, because the deed of easement says that they have to. They can't impact the conservation values. This one too, the original landowner loved the property, took great care of it. New owner, not so much. So we are going to have to compel them to see their responsibilities through. And then this one gets a whole slide all of its own because of the cute donkeys. This property is up between Monument and Palmer Lake, and they breed miniature donkeys. And they stand about that tall. They're just really adorable. They've got problems with neighbors who don't address their weeds. That's Canada thistle on the neighboring property, really thick. Again, they don't want to, most people are reluctant to fight with their neighbors about their weeds, so they just have to really address them when they come onto their property. They don't really want to use chemicals on their property because of the grazing of their little donkeys. And there have been some concerns on the property of poisonous plants, which aren't necessarily, the noxious weeds, but they can be poisonous. And they did lose a couple little donkeys. And then they were afraid that those were because of the potentially bad plants on the property. So you have to watch that. As a landowner, even if it's not a noxious weed, you want to pay attention to what's out there if you've got livestock, because there can be things that are natives that are dangerous too. So if you get a monoculture out there, your critters can be eating things you don't want them to eat. And I thought I'd finish with a couple of our star easements. The Schmidt property, first time I did his monitoring report, told him he had leafy spurge. He called me back and was like, what is that? Why do I care? Within the next year, he'd bought himself a sprayer, had all the leafy spurge taken care of, released insects on his property for the yellow toadflax, and mows so he doesn't have to put down so much herbicide all the time. So he does a really nice integrated weed management. And then Ruth Ann Steele's property. Lord help you if you're a noxious weed on her property, because she'll get you. So she either shovel you up or spray you with herbicide, and so she has a beautiful property. It's full of nice wildflowers and very few weeds. Now, not to say that they're not on there. She does still get them, but she knows where they're at. She keeps an eye in mind where the patches are, knows their tendency to come back and lay down seeds and come back to the same place, and addresses them pretty quickly when they make the mistake of popping their heads up. So that is a little beetle. He's eating that musk thistle. Someone told me one way you could tell if you might have those biocontrols on your musk thistle is if it looks like it's throwing up. So it's throwing that little white fuzz out. And sure enough, there's a little beetle in there doing what he's supposed to be doing. So.